طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا فعلمنا يا رب ولا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا ففهمنا يا رب. So welcome back to the introduction to the Islamic sciences. As we're overviewing the main or some of the main subjects that are studied within the Islamic sciences curriculum. And today, inshallah, we'll do Ulum al-Hadith. Last time, 2 weeks ago, we did Ulum al-Quran. Do a quick recap, inshallah, of that, or at least some of the points from that. And then we'll jump into the bulk of the topic today. So we'll either review it all or part of it, because people probably with the week off, I don't know if they'll remember. Then we'll overview the Hadith sciences, the 10 preliminary points covered in every ilm. Then I'll try to give some takeaways and suggestions and see what's next, inshallah, which will be in 2 weeks' time, بإذن ta'ala. طيب, what's a possible definition of علوم القرآن, if anyone remembers? Or even let's take this. What does the word ilm mean?
No,
طيب, good. What does knowledge
understanding different things, different concepts.
mean? Okay. How do we differentiate knowledge from what's not knowledge? Remember, we said that knowledge is knowing things, for example, as they are, according to proof, is considered knowledge, right? If I do not know, for example, that's ignorance, right? Or if I know it unlike what it is, that's not also considered knowledge. So that would be either compound ignorance or I'm following the wrong proofs, for example, that would result into me holding the weaker of the views, right, or the weaker of possibilities. That would not be right, and it's a hierarchy. Ilm being the top, right? If you want in the middle, it's shak. When you're in doubt, it's 50-50. Both sides, nothing tips, right? When something tips over the other, that's called knowledge or confidence at least, right? And if confidence is based on proofs, that is one of the categories of knowledge. And obviously certainty is when it's 100%. And when the scales tip and I take the tipped the scale the wrongful side of the scale, right, that would be conjecture, right? And obviously when I don't know, that's not ignorance. And when I know it wrongfully and I think I do, it's compound ignorance. Now that's not what's considered ilm when as a technical term. For example, when we say or as a nomenclature, when we say مثلا علم الحديث or علم القرآن, what's meant here is a specific subject that's gathered under certain principles, right? So um, the knowledge of biology is one subject, it has certain principles. The subject of Shakespearean plays is a specific subject. So it's under one title, right? And it has different, specific contents within it. So when you say علوم القرآن, علوم الحديث, and so forth, that's what they mean by it, right? And علوم here would be plural of ilm. Why? Because under علوم القرآن are many different subjects, as mentioned last time. That would come to second topic. Now, if علوم القرآن is this encompassing subject, sorry, before we get to that, now what's the definition of that? One of the possible definitions, it is it's the subject that studies the Quran from various angles, right? Or it's a subject that studies the Quran from various angles, and it gives examples like the reasons of revelation, the gathering of the Quran, the principles of tafsir, and so forth, right? And if you remember, Ulum al-Quran talks about the higher principles of these subjects. But then these specific subjects can be standalone books and subjects in themselves. So Ulum al-Quran would talk about tafsir as a topic, but it would not do an actual tafsir of the Quran from al-Fatiha to an-Nas. That would be the application of that. That would be a book of tafsir. But Ulum al-Quran would have a section detailing what is tafsir, how did it develop, how is it properly done, how is it improperly done, and so forth. Right? Ulum al-Quran would have reasons of a revelation. So if I come by them, I would know them. But it's not a book of reasons of revelation. Asbab al-Nuzul is an actual subject that authors have wrote about, and they start from the reasons of revelation from the beginning of the Mus'haf till the end. Right? But Ulum al-Quran would discuss what is Asbab al-Nuzul. What does that term mean? What does it apply to? How do we know it? What are the lessons drawn from, and so forth, right? So it gives the principles around these subjects. Right. Now let's jump to two, and I already gave examples of them. What are specific examples under the subject of Ulum al-Quran? I already mentioned two, so you're allowed to say reasons of revelation. Bab al-Nuzul. Another one
Uh,
I mentioned as well. Explanation of Quran would be
tafsir.
tafsir. What about a third one? Maybe I mentioned when you were here at class, related to the rulings of recitation, for example. Hmm? Okay, perhaps ayat al-ahkam in Quran, but what about the rulings of recitation of Quran? What's that called? Taj, tajweed. So tajweed and qira'at would be also a possible section in ulum al-Quran. طيب, this one I don't think you would remember, but if anyone remembers, jump in. What were three central works that were prominent in this field? When I talked about the pioneer of the field and I gave kind of a rough historical overview, I mentioned three ulama that, a lot of the works are based on their works. So their works are very central. If you don't remember them, that's okay. Imam al-Zarkashi, okay, is one of them. Imam al-Suyuti is the second one. And Imam al-Zurqani is the third. Try to remember them, especially if you have interest in Quran. If you ever see them in the footnotes, whether it's translation or you know how to read Arabic or Urdu and they're quoting from them in Arabic or they're translating in Urdu and so forth, you would kind of know, oh, yeah, this is a big name in the field, right? So these are prominent people. They're not the only ones, but their books on Ulum al-Quran are three central ones. It's almost impossible that and one of them is more modern, Imam al-Zurqani's work, but no work almost talks about the subject and cannot reference. You have to, because they're expensive. They're strong subjects. They're strong books in the subject. Nah.
Are there three names in the Google Classroom?
If on the slides, yes. If
Is
the
it?
slides are uploaded, then they should be there. Really? I think the slide should be posted, but it's good. I'll try to remember that. I thought I got a notice for both the slides
Uh,
and the videos, but if not, I'll make sure that the slides get uploaded as well.
yeah, I've seen the videos.
Like, is the subject obligatory to learn? Is علوم القرآن فرض to learn?
No, not in its entirety.
Excellent. So it's not fard. Like, is it fard on somebody to learn?
Yes, someone who's trying to teach the content to somebody else.
أيوة, excellent. So if someone is going to be a specialist in the Quran or a specific area in the Quran, they probably have to study علوم القرآن, both from a Shari'i point of view, even from a logical point of view. Like, how are you going to attain that goal without studying the subject? Like, but for them, they have to study some level of ulum al-Quran or maybe even extensive level of ulum al-Quran to meet that teaching or research or whatever role that they're in. Like, what are issues tackled in the Quranic sciences? We kind of hinted to that, but just for the sake of time, we said, what was it? Tadleed is one of them. Like, that talks about the miraculous nature of Quran. Tartil, all the subjects about, مثلا, all the subjects related to tajweed and qira'at and so forth. Ta'wil, related to the explanation of the Quran. Tanzil, the Quran, the revelation of the Quran, the types of revelation, the different circumstances, and so forth. And I think also, what was the fifth one? Ta'wil, Tanzil, and Tajmi', yeah, the gathering of the Quran itself, and the writing of the Masahif, and the rulings related to Rasm al Mushaf, and so forth. So I think these are five main themes. Under them are the different ulum of Quran. And that's just one way to organize it. You might find ulama use different ways. The point is to understand. So whether you categorize them like this, categorize them like that, that's not really central. Let's review the knowledge map again. We have the Sharia sciences, linguistic sciences, social sciences, natural sciences. Let's zero in on the Sharia sciences. We have the sources. We're doing the second one, inshallah. We have the tools, and inshallah we'll get to those. And we have the fundamentals and the aims. These are the ones that we should be doing at a certain capacity, anyways, in our life, right? Right. Before we start علوم الحديث, let's take some key texts from the Quran and Sunnah just to get us into the subject. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hujurat tells us, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. Believers, if an evildoer brings you news, verify it, right? We also find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Surah Al-Najm, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Nor does he speak of his own whims, it's only a revelation sent to him. We have set down the reminder so that you can explain to people what has been revealed to them. أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. So the Prophet ﷺ is going to clarify what the Quran is, what's in the Quran. So here, Allah reveals to the Quran as the revealed, and the reminder is probably talking about the Sunnah, right? He's not going to talk about the Quran twice. We have sent the reminder to you so that you can explain to people what has revealed to them. So here Allah is alluding to another source of guidance, right? Which is the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, to clarify what's in the Quran. Why to clarify what's in the Quran? Because some things in the Quran are mentioned in brief, right? The details are in the Sunnah, right? Or they're mentioned in an unbound way, and they're bound in the they're unbound, they're bound in the Quran and unbound in the Sunnah, or they're general in the Quran and they might be specific in the Sunnah, and so forth, right? Whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you, leave it, right? وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. طب how do we do that? If we're going to only go back to the Quran, we have to go back to the Quran and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let those who disobey his orders beware, for an affliction may befall them or a painful torment may overtake them. ليحذر الذين يخالفون عن أمره, and the pronoun here is going back to the Prophet ﷺ, that what will befall them, right? An affliction or a painful torment. Allah will not threaten someone except if it's something serious. That means the Prophet ﷺ cannot be disobeyed. He has to be obeyed. So that means I'm not just going to go to the Quran for my guidance. I'm going to make sure that what I'm doing is not something that the Prophet ﷺ doesn't tell me to do, right? For example, you find method that he told the man to take off his golden ring. You won't find that in the Quran, but he told him that, take him off. It's not allowed for men to wear gold. And from the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ, imagine the Sahaba hearing these ahadith or their likes. May Allah give radiance to the person who hears my speech and narrates it as he heard it. نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ امْرِئًا سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَوَعَاهَا فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَ. Not only is the Prophet ﷺ praying for these people, he's giving them the qualities. Why are they being prayed for? What distinguishes them? They heard his guidance and they narrated it carefully as they heard it. So that means they probably either took notes, they memorized it, they double checked it, and they went and conveyed it, right? Whoever narrates a hadith from me that knows as a lie, then he is one of the liars, right? In Sahih Muslim, this has tawatur, that the Prophet ﷺ in mass transmission has warned that people make lies about him. So do you really think the Sahaba heard all of this and did nothing with it? It's impossible, right? The Sahaba heard these ahadith from him directly, right? They received the Quran. It must have stirred in them, just like we took the verses that gave prominence and importance of learning the Quran, that some of them would dedicate their time to this. Like Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah said that he was poor, he would accompany the Prophet ﷺ, so he accompanied them longer than the other Sahaba, because the other Sahaba had to work. So he heard what they didn't hear, and naturally he memorized what they didn't memorize. So it's not weird that he was one of the foremost narrators of hadith, or that one of the foremost narrators of hadith is his wife, because she's young. She accompanied him for a long time, and she had an aptitude for ilm anyways. She heard a lot of the hadith and narrated. Or مثلا, the Sahaba that served the Prophet, they were khuddam, right? When you study the seerah, you know that certain Sahaba were tasked with the khidmah of the Prophet ﷺ. Naturally, they narrated more. Why? They're seeing more, they're being asked more, right? They're looking, they're watching. And they're realizing the description that Allah gave is about that man. So what are they going to do? They just passively be there around him? No. They're watching his worship, they're watching his behavior, they're watching his manners, his customs. They narrated everything about him, including his looks, his height and his body and his hair and how many white hairs he had, and and so forth, right? When he got injured, what he used to like to eat. They went at the great length. There's no one on the face of the earth that had details recorded about him like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If we know this, we'll understand what made ulum al-hadith, first of all, give importance to the Sahaba, what made it important to us, right? If any of you attend the first class, said we cannot learn like the Sahaba. Now the Sahaba, they had the luxury that they can just listen to the Prophet ﷺ and follow. But what would need to be done if someone that didn't see the Prophet ﷺ? So they had to access the hadith through someone else. Okay, so gave the importance of writing, right, and memorizing and understanding and properly conveying these hadith for both reasons: for the threat that you should not lie about the Prophet ﷺ, and for the great reward that if you are one of those person that memorizes and conveys properly, right, you have an amazing reward, right? Like definition. You don't need to cover ilm again. I invite you to review that on yourself. You can find the definition of ilm in any book that covers ilm. So any book like Ulum al-Hadith, Ulum al-Quran, whatever, you probably find it right in the beginning. They'll do the lexical definition and the technical definition. Or if you study Usul al-Fiqh, they'll usually also cover the subject of ilm prior to them covering Usul. So you can look at it there. Okay. Ulum al-Hadith, then what we need to know is what the word Hadith means. Hadith in language means multiple things. It can mean speech, and it's probably the most linguistic meaning uh, 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 in relation to the subject. It can also mean new, something that is new is hadith, right? Or muhdath, right? But here it's probably referred to speech. Why? Because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ includes his speech among other things, right? But ulum al hadith as a subject is what? It's probably one of these two definitions possible. There's many, but this is one of them. So the principles and fundamentals by which one knows the accepted and rejected from hadith. That can be one of the definitions of ulum al hadith. Or everything transmitted from the Prophet, peace be upon him, from his words, actions, approvals, and descriptions. Okay. The word sunnah also you might find ulum sunnah as another term for this subject. So sunnah would in language means way and path. And obviously, in terms of definition, it would mean this one, the second one. So the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. For the scholars of Ulum al-Hadith, that's how they define it. When we go to fiqh, they also use the word Sunnah and it only means recommended. Or the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh also use the word Sunnah, but what they mean by it is everything beyond the descriptions. Okay, why would the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh not look at the descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ? Why would they only look at his words, actions, and approvals? Good. Close. More specific than teaching. Teaching what? Yes, rulings. So descriptions is not something I can emulate. The skin color of the Prophet ﷺ, that's not something I'm going to emulate, right? His personal habits that are not recommended in themselves are not something that I can emulate, but I'm not probably required to emulate. But his words, actions, and approvals are something I emulate. Because if he approves something, it's allowed. If he doesn't approve of it, it's haram. If it's something that he did, unless it's specific to him, it's something that I should be copying. I can be copying him because it's fard, like the salah fard, and I can be copying because it's sunnah, like qiyam al-layl, right? Or his words, he's directing me, do this, don't do this, right? I would do that, right? But his descriptions don't matter to the scholars of fiqh, right? So that's why the scholars of usul al-fiqh don't look at it. And naturally, when it gets passed down to fiqh, they don't look at the descriptions, except if it pertains to ahkam, right? But in general, words, actions, and approvals and descriptions are what is considered by ulum sunnah and is also the concern of the scholars of seerah, right? So they will do it in chronological order. They would talk about his life story from birth all the way up to death, right? While in ulum al hadith, you would talk about hadith as a sub. Okay, let me quickly get the charger there. I'll be back in a second. Hmm. Right. And these two definitions will help us see the two main categories of the subject. So the main two categories of the subject are riwayah and diraya. We'll see of them. These are kind of the two main branches of ulum al-hadith. It'll come handy in a second. But the subject matter is the sunnah itself, right? So while ulum al-Quran, its subject matter is the Quran, here the subject matter is the sunnah. If you forget what the sunnah means, it means the second part there. So the Prophet ﷺ's wordings, his actions, his approvals, and descriptions, that is what is looked upon in ulum al-hadith. Uh, but they organize it mainly in terms of the narration and the narrator, right? Because they want to know, is the narration sound? And you need to look at the narrators and compare the narrations to kind of come up with these kind of conclusions, right? What's the fruit of the subject? The thamara. So the definition is al-had, right? Subject matter is al-mawdu', right? Fruit is thamara, to appreciate the status of the Prophet ﷺ. When you see the great effort that ulama went, you realize they did this because they are dealing with the best of creation, alayhi salatu wasalam, right? To appreciate their great service, their scholarship. And this truly is a ilm that's unique. So the people of the book don't have ulum al-hadith, or it's like, unfortunately, uh, some historians, some subjects of even that we have, that we kind of we know, we take for granted in politics and whatever, you'll find that there's no isnad to the opinions that happen. It was something that they know and it just got passed down communally, whatever. No, in ulum al-hadith, to the degree that we have certain hadith that we have just very few chains about, but they're more authentic than entire divine books of other people, like the claimed, authenticity of the Bible or so forth. That shows you the uniqueness of this ilm. That they just they gathered the narrations, they gathered the narrators, they went into the biographical details of the narrators, they went into the principles of acceptance and rejection. Their ilm in itself is very developed and it's very unique. No other ummah has this, and that's from the blessings of Islam. Something we should thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. And even if we never study it, we should appreciate the people that really dedicated their lives to it. If you look at Imam al-Bukhari, he took 16 years to author Sahih Bukhari. That wasn't his only book. He wrote a book in history, he wrote a book in other things. He spent on that book what we don't do in our entire careers. And then you have people kind of like, oh, Bukhari is this, Bukhari is that. This is ridiculous. If you just know how much time he did, and he wasn't just like an amateur, he was already a alim that was given prominence at his time by the large ulama of hadith, really foremost ulama, and he put that kind of effort, right? And he checked it and rechecked it and had others check it and so forth. It's amazing. Okay. Um, طبعا to understand the subject of what's the proper transmission of hadith, what's the criteria of its acceptance and sound understanding, and obviously on the opposite side to fortify oneself against misconceptions and distortions, uh, a lot of noise that gets happened on ulum al-hadith and so forth from Orientalists or modernists or so forth, and to improve sound thinking. If you ever study the subject, you realize that they weren't just applying things in a mechanical way. They actually you get a lot of sound thinking uh, principles from applying ulum al-hadith. So, for example, one of the reasons why they would reject a hadith, even if it looks like it's sound and accepted, if it negates a larger pool of hadith on the same subject in a way that's irreconcilable, right? Or, for example, you narrate two chain from someone and that person مثلا did you messed up the name of someone, right? So here the problem is not just that you looked at the person is honest. They were honest, but they made a mistake in the relaying of the information, right? Uh, or مثلا, for example, the subject of the uncommon words in hadith. Why did that subject develop? Because I can't just narrate something for you and you don't understand it. What are you going to do with it? You're not going to do anything with it. So I explain to you the difficult words in a text or whatnot, so that not only do you have sound transmission, you also have sound understanding. So when you start like applying these various principles, you realize that various steps that don't just apply to hadith, you can even apply them as life skills in life in general, right? That's I have someone is honest. Can I trust? Okay, can I trust this person only in the honesty section? Is it also honesty in or reliable? You know, maybe they're honest, but they're not reliable. Okay, no, they're both honest and reliable. Does this fit within the rest of the body? Okay, or if it doesn't, or it might be reconciled and so forth, right? So you realize that oh, there are steps and methodologies, not just a random grumpy people just saying Sahih and Hasan and Da'if based on their feelings. So that's not how it works. Mirror طبعا is one of the greatest subjects because it deals with the Prophet ﷺ and his Sunnah, and this is the second source of Sharia. If Ulum al-Quran is unique because it's the primary source of Sharia, this is the secondary source of Sharia, and it stands alone by itself. We get guidance from the Quran, we get guidance from the Sunnah, we get guidance from the Quran and Sunnah together, right? How does it relate? It's one of the Shara'i sciences, and it's from the subjects of the sources, من علوم المصادر الشرعية. Okay, okay, relation. Pioneer. Okay. Remember again, pioneer is not necessarily the first person that engaged in the subject. But if there's a first authoring of the book or a first teaching of the book, that's what the ulama generally will mention in the pioneer. And I'll mention him in a second. They usually make one specific alim as a standout in this area. But let's see what happened before this alim. Obviously, we have the Sahaba's own transmissions and writings from the Prophet ﷺ during his time. So the Prophet ﷺ initially told them, do not write from me, when there was fear that hadith would be mixed with Quran. When that fear was removed, the Sahaba were allowed to write hadith. So they were already memorizing the hadith and they were already writing the hadith until they were forbidden. And then when they were not forbidden anymore, they continued writing hadith. Not only writing, we know that certain Sahaba had certain collections. Okay? And then hadith transmission, while they're hearing about the virtue of teaching hadith and so forth, was happening as well. The Prophet ﷺ would send Sahaba teach certain people. So they weren't just teaching them ahkam, they were also narrating from them hadith, right? And he would tell them sometimes as he gave his khutbah and hajj, like we're in the days that we're going to probably reflect on hajj and khutbah al-wada. So what did he say at the end? فَلْيُبَلِّغِ الشَّاهِدْ مِنْكُمُ الْغَائِبِ. Let those who are witnessing me narrate this to those who didn't witness. Those who didn't attend, narrate this from me, right? Narrate this from me, right? So he would ask them to narrate, right? And we find the principles and guidance scattered within the hadith teachings and the works of the scholars. Before they were brought together as a subject of ulum al-Quran, these principles and guidance are found. They're found all the way from the Quran itself, right? Allah is telling us that if someone is corrupt is coming to you, don't just listen to anything. You have to have a criteria of accepting and not accepting news. So you're obviously not going to just apply this in one area of life. You're going to apply this in an even more serious area of accepting the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? The principles that the Prophet ﷺ himself said, right? That you're not allowed to alter his words, right? So all these principles, then the ulama themselves included principles in their books because they're not just narrating a hadith and just putting their narrations. They started putting introductions to the books. They would put principles. They would put certain gradings under the hadith. Okay, maybe they're not explaining, but the principles are there. So this culmination of principles scattered in various books can now be gathered if someone wants, say, let me gather it from here and from here and from here and from here from here and make it into one source. Rather than this person tiring themselves going back to 15, 20 books to gather this culmination of principles, I'm gonna do the gathering. This is my field, right? And I'll put it into one book, right? So I'm loosely kind of summarizing, right? طب who were the ulama that did this? Okay, remember again. So the two main branches are in علوم الحديث. علم الحديث رواية and علم الحديث دراية. رواية is meaning the actual transmission of the hadith, and diraya is the actual principles of acceptance and rejection of it. Who did the first one? Obviously, it was happening already from the time of the Sahaba. Sayyidina Abu Huraira would write, would have, there's a Sahifa Sadiqa, so you can look at it in the books of Ulum al Hadith, right? Sahaba. But Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri was tasked by Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz to collect hadith formally. This is a formal direction from the Khalif. The ulama already doing this, but now he's coming back to make sure that this area is given proper attention to so that this area does not weaken. The area of hadith narration. Okay? And the technical hadith principles they mention in the books is Al-Qadi Rama Harmuzi. Okay? He was the first one to write in this book, although his book is not the most developed book and it's not used now in terms of teaching. But in terms of history, when they write how did the subject come about, these two names come big in history. They'll mention Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri as a prominent figure, as a pioneer in the gathering and the narration of hadith, and Al-Qadi Rama Hormuzi in the subject of ulum al-hadith or ulum al-sunnah. But what are some big names in the subject? Ibn Salah is a big one. He wrote arguably the text that gave the foundation of various texts that came after. The ulama either expanded it, explained it, summarized it, put it into verse, added to it, right? But they used it as a base, right? One of the big ulama of hadith that has various writings scattered in ulum al-hadith, right? All writing in this subject and this subject. There's almost no subject in ulum al-hadith that he hasn't written in, is al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. Okay? And from the scholars that based more refined or developed works on these kind of efforts are, for example, Imam al-Suyuti, which came also across with us in Ulum al-Quran. He wrote a 1,000-line poem of Ulum al-Hadith. And Imam al-Iraqi also wrote one as well. Okay, Imam al-Sakhawi made a commentary on one of those. It's read until now. One of the ulama of Al-Azhar just finished it fairly recently, a few years, a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. Okay, and one of the ulama that really refined the ilm in a very small text, that really did a masterful summary of the text into a short essay type, is Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He wrote Nuthbat al-Fikr, which is also one of the very standard texts until this day, studied all over the Muslim world, east, west, north, south, Arab, non-Arab. They all study that text, its commentaries, its glosses, and so forth. All right, so these are some main names. It's good to kind of know some of them. If you're gonna study the subject, you'll always find these names in the footnotes or the references or the examples or the mentioning of principles or mentioning of definitions or so forth. Because they consolidated a lot of that. Like in terms of narrations themselves, what are some of the early narrations before the famous books that happened? Muwatta Imam Malik. Remember, Imam Malik is narrating just with one generation um, between him and the Sahaba, right? So it's Malik and Nafi' and Ibn Umar right away. There's just one person between them. Imam Malik has one of the earliest works. This one until now, it's there. We have prints, we have multiple narrations of it. Ulama until this day, if they're conducting a hadith class, this might be their choice to read, right? There's early works like Musannaf and Razaq al-Sa'ani, the Sunan of Sa'id ibn Mansur, and so forth. These are works of hadith. There's many works. There came a time in Muslim history where the ulama went back to these early works, went back to what they've memorized, with the asanid that they have, and so forth, and produced written uh, uh, larger compilations of hadith that became known as the canonical works. Because these are the works that either were the most authentic, like Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim, or uh, organized in the chapters of fiqh, so they're very good for research purposes. You go back to the subject, you know the heading, you look at the hadith that's there, and they're in them are also principles of ulum al-hadith, right? In them are the terminologies, some of the gradings, some of the commentaries, some of the principles. They're scattered in this. So if you ever studied ulum al-hadith and you want to see an application, you can study one of these books, for example, like Sunan al-Tirmidhi and Abu Dawood and Nasa'i, so forth, right? The ones that I have there. And Musnad Imam Ahmad, probably one of the even larger collection than some of these. And Imam Ahmad was known as both scholar of fiqh and a scholar of hadith of tall order, right? He organized his book not in the way of Sunan. He called it what they call Masanid. It's organized by narrator. So he'll chapter them by narrators. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, then Sayyidina Umar, then Sayyidina Uthman, then Sayyidina, like that. Usually they'll go by the virtues of the Sahaba and they'll go down. So now you don't go by subject matter like the Sunan, right? Nor the Sahih. The Sahih are also organized by subject matter, but they're not organized like the books of fiqh. They're organized more of like from an Imani point of view, starting like from the book of Revelation, going to other subjects like Tawheed and whatever, right? Um, more qualities of Iman. What's the name of the subject? علوم الحديث, علم الحديث, right? Or علوم السنة, علم السنة, right? These are very common names, right? If you ever enroll in a university class with those titles, you're studying this subject. Or if you get a book with that title, this is the book that would cover this and so on. What are the sources of the subject? Obviously, the chains of narration, their descriptions, their categorizations, right? So that you can assess them. The principles of the Imams that you can apply, right? And Hadith literature itself. These are the raw material of ulum al-Hadith. The principles of the Imams that were taught and passed down, the actual Hadith literature, and the chains of narration of all the Hadith. These three parts, right? These three main areas make up ulum al-Hadith, right? Because you need a substance to apply to, right? You need an area to assess your application, and you need principles to apply to the area. Okay? Similar to ulum al-Quran, it's not personally obligatory. It's communally obligatory on the ummah to study. It might be personal obligation on someone who is a hadith scholar, obviously, right? They'll be a specialist in hadith, whether in narration or in analysis or whatever, right? They would need to study this ilm. How can they speak about a subject that they haven't studied? That's impossible, both logically and shar'i. It's haram to do so without knowledge. And it's logically impossible to do so without knowledge. Like, what does it tackle? It tackles طبعا the statements, the actions, approvals, and descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ and the principles of acceptance and rejection. So for example, that a Sahih hadith needs to have five qualities. The chain needs to be uh, connected. Uh, صح اتصل سنده واضح بدون شذوذ ولا علة, so that the narration doesn't have an anomaly in it, right? It doesn't have a hidden deficiency, and the narrators are all connected, and then every narration is both every narrator, not narration, every narrator is both adl and dabt, right? They are trustworthy and they are reliable in their narrations. For example, if you know these principles, you can take them. Look, does it apply to the hadith or no? If it does, it's sahih. If not, it's not, right? And so forth. Let's say another topic that they look at is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, who's the final narrator, right? If he's narrating from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's called hadith Qudsi. If he's not narrating from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he's saying the words directly, it's just hadith nabawi or hadith marfu'. If it's a hadith that is thought that's attributed to him, but it's not, and it's actually, we looked at, it's a sahabi's wording, but we still might use it. We'll call this mawquf, right? That's not the Prophet ﷺ's narration. That's the narration of the Sahaba. But we need the narrations of the Sahaba because sometimes they narrated things that they must have learned from the Prophet ﷺ. So when they detail the details of the akhirah or things like that, there's no way they learned this stuff by themselves. This is not stuff that you come up with imagination. So while this is from the Sahabi, it takes the ruling of the marfu, right? So these kind of principles are what we learn in ulum al-hadith. Any questions before we take the takeaways? Suggestions? Don't be shy. Nope. Let's take that. We're even going faster than last week. Like, what are suggestions? I usually like in these kind of technical subjects not to throw someone in the subject right away. So I'm going to give you some suggestions. I would suggest if you haven't done anything related to hadith whatsoever, and you want to benefit in your life, study with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not technically under ulum al hadith, but it's more important. I don't see what's the benefit of you knowing the categories of narrators and narrations and whatever. I don't think you're going to be editing a manuscript anytime soon. So start actually with the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Know his life story if you don't know it. And if you know it, study it over and over. Connect yourself to the Prophet ﷺ. You being connected to him and following his orders is better than you studying narrations and you're not following his orders. If you kind of come up with that, right? Okay. If you want to learn ulum al-hadith and you haven't learned actual hadith themselves, no, probably start there. Take a short work on some of the comprehensive hadith and learn what they mean, like the 40 Nawawi hadiths, right? 40 Nawawi hadiths that summarize the entire deen, their 42 narrations, are much more important for a Muslim to study um, before مثلا ulum al-hadith because they'll teach you about Islam and Iman and Akhlaq and shyness and that we have to follow the reliable way of the Prophet. Many key principles in life to not get attached to this world, be like a stranger, right? Have a lot of istighfar in your life, do tawbah, right? And so forth, right? These are very important means. Then, okay, if you have more aptitude, then maybe this is the fourth point before the third one. It would make more sense there. Then maybe learn or listen even if you just listen, even if you don't just study the work, get into the habit of listening a hadith like مثلا Riyadh al-Salihin or the same 40 Nawawi or abridged works of the canonical works like the summaries of Sahih al-Bukhari, the summaries of Sahih Muslim. Listening to the words of the Prophet ﷺ has an effect on Iman and it gets the ear to break the ice between it and Arabic, right? قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن أبي هريرة عن ابن عمر you'll find that certain phrases become familiar to you, right? Like the joke that used to it was actually true. Whenever someone hey, Rawahu Muslim, they think, well, I'm a Muslim too. They never knew that's actually a person called Muslim. His name is Muslim Ibn al-Hajjaj Ibn Muslim, the great Imam of Hadith, right? So, so listening to a Hadith is also probably a good idea. Now, if you have more aptitude than that, maybe start learning about the scholars and figures of Hadith. That might motivate you to learn about the subject. Maybe learn the subject of Imam al-Bukhari, very common. There's a lot of lectures about him, Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, any one of these famous Imams, learn about them. It will motivate you to learn Hadith itself because that's what they did, right? Their life story will show you they traveled and they heard and they wrote and they studied and they cried and they worshipped. So it's very inspiring, right? Now, if all of this, mashallah, is done and you want to do serious study, then I would suggest doing the same two main branches again, right? Remember, there's a branch of narration and there's a branch of principles. In the actual hadith themselves, start with the small collections like 40 Nawi or any other 40 collections. There's 40 collections on Al Bayt, there's 40 collections on the virtue of Quran, many topics, right? Any of these short works, you can study them if you have access to someone who knows the subject, can teach it, study it. For example, in the IDA, you'll find Sheikh Ziyad teaches the 40 Nawawi hadiths. I think Sheikh Adnan also did it. So whether it's in recording or in person, you can start there. If you've done the 40 Nawawi and you want to jump into something a little bit higher, you can go to something like Riyadh al-Salihin or Umdat al-Ahkam. Riyadh al-Salihin is more about qualities. Umdat al-Ahkam is like the foundational ahadith. Based on them are the rulings, right? They're mainly in Bukhari and Muslim, right? And then you can maybe jump to canonical works. So obviously, I'm doing a horrible summary there. If you ever follow a scholar, they'll have for you the curriculum set from book one all the way up to the more advanced books. But generally, you want to go into 3 to 4 steps. You don't jump into the big works before the intermediate works, before the short works. They're written in different lengths on purpose. For example, while Sahih Bukhari is all Sahih and nice, but Sahih Bukhari is also the most meticulous work. So if you just read wordings like this, yeah, you'll benefit, but you won't gain the gems of the book. The person that studied ulum al-hadith well and laddered themselves well, when they go to Sahih al-Bukhari, they see what other people don't see. Not because they're a magician, but because they're trained to see principles and orders or whatever. They realize he doesn't do things by chance. He narrates a specific narration in a chapter, and he'll narrate the same narration with a various wording in another chapter for a reason. Sometimes you know the reason, sometimes you don't know the reason. He's not just a guy that doing things randomly. He's a very meticulous imam. And when you read the commentaries and the details, you realize, wow. And that's why people take a long time to study his work. They don't just rush through it, right? So that they're able to extract all of that. Same can be said, obviously, of Imam Muslim, Imam al-Nasa'i, Imam Ahmad, and so forth. طيب, let's take the more theoretical side. What about ulum al-hadith gradually? Also, you would start with something very, very short, like the Bayquniya poem or Gharami Sahih, right? Someone will probably offer you a translation and explanation of that. It's very short poems. Bayquniya is only 34 lines. It's a very short, it's like a two-page printout. It summarizes some of the key terminologies and topics of ulum al-hadith. Same thing with Gharami Sahih, but it's written in the form, it's written symbolically. It's written like a love poem, but it's actually meant as a hadith poem. So he says, Gharami Sahih, my love is true. But he's not talking about love, he's talking about the term Sahih, right? And then he starts running through this, which is a nice poem to read because it reads like a love poem, but all the terminologies are there. So you can actually test yourself. Is that it? Is that it? Is that it? And then you can actually highlight them all. And then you review. Do you know the definitions of them and the subjects related to these definitions, right? So these are nice kind of icebreakers, right? If you want an actual subject, like the names that we mentioned, the Nukhba of Hafiz ibn Hajar, or an abridgment of Ibn Salah's Muqaddimah, can be, for example, a level. It'll all depend on your teacher. Or a commentary on some of these works, like Tadrib al-Rawi is by Imam Suyuti. It's a commentary of Imam al-Nawawi's books in book in Ulum al-Hadith. So the third level would be, for example, a commentary on one of the standard books. And obviously, the most advanced are the larger works. So the 1,000 line poems on Ulum al-Hadith and their commentaries, because these really go into everything. They will consolidate everything that was done before, right, and go into other details, right, and cover the breadth of the subject, right, in its different details. Okay, and inshallah, if all goes well, we will do Arabi uh, next, بإذن الله تعالى. Not next week, because next week I'll be traveling. So you'll have another week off. Inshallah, after I come back, and God willing, hoping any good health, we'll go from here to the end of the class, inshallah. Okay. So before we end, any questions? Yes? Post the slide for our class. Because then I can print it. Yes, inshallah. And I can make notes there. Yeah, I don't have the. You meant before the class itself. Okay, okay. Yeah. Let me. حاضر. Let me put that. I have a bunch of points that I have to cover. Let me try to remember them. But yes, جزاك الله خير. Let me make a note of that. But that's it, sir. Any questions from the shabab?
Uh, this was a Google Classroom question. I was wondering
Yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
could enroll me into the first one. So I'm already in the
Okay.
Introduction to Science.
Yeah, I can't enroll you myself,
Yeah,
but I think you're already enrolled. You just have to accept your invitation.
I have the Introduction to Science, to the science thing.
But the other one, no?
I never got an email.
Can you email the IDA people and tell them that?
Like from the reply, I mean.
Not reply. I don't like the admin. Send the email to the admin
Uh-huh.
and tell the admin I am enrolled in the first class, but I'm yet to be added to the Google Classroom. Can you
Okay.
add?
Okay.
If that doesn't work, just tell me and I'll ask her to remind you.
Yeah, I'll do it. Sure.
Okay, Akram, any questions?
Not really,
Okay.
no, because part of it was I actually already attended one of Sheikh Adnan's teachings on
Okay.
his conference.
Good, mashallah. So you're a step ahead.
I looked, it's not the whole one,
Well,
just 21 of the hadith.
mashallah. That's good. That's
I
good.
should take the other courses.
Yeah, no. So that's good. So all the different details that you see there, they're very brief in that book, are part of ulum al-hadith. So whenever they say the hadith is narrated by so and so, that's part of ulum al-hadith. When they grade the hadith in a certain way, that's part of ulum al-hadith. When they tell you this collection of hadith is like this, that's part of ulum al-hadith, right? All of that is part of ulum al-hadith. مثلا in Imam al-Nawawi's work, he barely mentions any commentary, but on some of that hadith, he'll mention certain words. فthat's part of مثلا علوم الحديث غريب الحديث. Some of the copies of the text he has at the end of the Nawawi collection, he has the main main definitions and terms that he adds. So that's also part of al-Hadith. He does it in a very summarized manner, but in ulum al-Hadith they get expanded and they get broken up by chapters. Allah, just in case it benefits you or others here. Okay. ماشي جزاكم الله خير مغرب is soon so you're welcome to stay to pray inshallah I hope you do and exert yourself in the 10 days of the Hajj. I meant to mention that in the first group. That's part of the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah. We are in the best days, increasing them in dhikr, in ibadah, in siyam, in tawbah, and so forth. This is the time to do this up to Eid, inshallah, and always mark Yawm Arafah and make that the greatest of those days in terms of ibadah. جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وإياكم